when we're talking about the fact that, sometimes you have days where you've got your inner critic happening, sometimes you even get external people criticizing you. And so when someone just gives you a piece of nice feedback, like, that is a real act of kindness. Sometimes I don't know if it's realized just what an impact that can have on a person's day. Just being told, hey, you did something great and I appreciated it. I'll be like, wow, that's really filled my cup up. Thank you.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to Connect with Confidence. And I'm really thrilled today to be connecting with Dr. Ellen Joan Nelson, who I connected with on LinkedIn, I think because of our friend Shamsa Lee, who I shared a podcast with recently. Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you, Kira. It's very exciting to be here with you.
So it is exciting and long awaited. I think you've been traveling, doing some exciting things and speaking in some interesting places.
Yes, I feel like I'm bragging, but I'm really excited. I spoke at TEDx last month, which was like a massive bucket list. It was very exciting. So I can't wait for the video to come out.
That's cool. That's when we first started chatting on LinkedIn. So this is actually our first conversation. We've only been on the Zoom for a couple of minutes, and I went, you know what, just let's hit record because, I can hear your excitement. And I've just said, let's just have an honest conversation about meaningful stuff, about the connections that have supported you and built your confidence, ways that you might have connected with other people and built their confidence, and things that you're doing in the world that are encouraging and lifting people. And, I've been really interested to see your hashtag work school hours. So I'd love you to share that with us. So rather than me just, reading a little bio, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, hey, Kerry, I'm Ellen. And it was through Shams and also Lindsay Freeman was sort of the connection.
Yes.
But basically, I served 10 years in the New Zealand Army, loved it. I actually did all my training on exchange in Australia. So that's how I am pretty connected to the Australian side. Yeah. Had a fabulous time, deployed overseas, loved it. And then when I left, I did a PhD just because I wanted one, Kerry. It wasn't because I was particularly passionate about a topic. I just wanted one. And I ended up doing this research about the experiences of women in the workforce, specifically their authentic leadership experiences and their well-being. The case study being the New Zealand military. And unfortunately found some really recurring themes of challenging experiences. Yeah. And I was like, well, this pisses me off because I love the organisation and it disappoints me that actually, they weren't always doing things great to women. So I ended up advising the military for about 18 months, kind of sharing these challenges and giving them recommendations for change. And it was kind of off the back of that, Kerry, that I was asked to speak about this journey. So kind of serving in the military, researching about it, and then advising. And that's then what led to this sort of subsequent piece of research about the experiences of working parents. Similar situation. I got a bunch of findings and I was like, well, I'm very dissatisfied with these findings. How do we change this? And that's kind of where hashtag work school hours was born. And now I've got my own business and it's very terrifying.
And all the entrepreneurs listening are like, oh yeah, I get that. We have this great idea and we end up in this journey and we're like, oh, I'm stepping out of the comfort zone like just one day after another.
Yeah.
So, and I guess your own personal experiences have shaped that journey also.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got 2 little kids. I've got actually this is exciting, Kerry. My eldest Toby, he just started school yesterday. So literally am now living this sort of school situation. And I've got our second little boy, Monty, is almost 2. So that was kind of it as well. I was on maternity leave last year from my, when I actually had a job and got paid a salary, and it was really quite nice. Yeah. As a business consultant, and was on maternity leave. And I was sort of marinating on all this data that I'd collected about these really just crap experiences of being a working parent. Not a single person had an outcome where they're like, yep, I've got this nailed. I've got this whole parenting work thing sorted and it's perfect. Nobody tells me that. And I was sort of, sitting in it thinking, this is now my life. I don't really like any of these things and I want to make change. So I might fall flat on my face, Kerry, but I'm going to give it a red hot go.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And what I'm seeing is that you're really doing this research ahead of the time that you need it. You're sharing this message ahead of actually being a parent of school kids. You're only just starting that yesterday. Mm-hmm. Whereas often people who are advising and creating change have looked back and said, I don't want people to go through what I've been through.
Yeah.
Maybe 20 years ago, I was, my son's now 22. So when I look back on those conversations, it was a very different world. You're really sharing this journey with people who maybe have even been juggling the school hours and the work hours for, the last 10 years. So it's really good to have your fresh eyes. And I think the research that you've done must have been pretty comprehensive. I imagine that the military is probably next level challenging in terms of doing as a parent than, maybe working in a business that's just down the road. You have layers and layers of complexity.
Yeah, absolutely. So the military side is, you're right, it is next level. And some of the challenges there that parents are facing are pretty despicable, to be honest, Kerry. Like some of the stuff like really made me made me cry. Like,
Yeah,
some
yeah,
of the women were sharing stories where they were still breastfeeding their baby and they were made to go out field, just really kind of traumatic stuff. So then, and in fact, interestingly, I'm just thinking this out loud now, but when I was studying it on the military side, and some of the, again, the experiences are really complex. When I was then doing it, and the much larger piece was actually more the corporate sector, it just seems so simple in comparison. I'm like, come on, corporate sector aren't facing those sorts of things. This is actually not that hard to solve. And so it almost gives me more, I don't know, conviction that this is really is doable to make some really positive change
yeah.
in most organizations.
Mm. And I think it's so important just to be having the conversations and normalizing the challenges that parents are going through. I was reading a blog last night, and I'm sorry I can't remember who wrote it, but I can find it if anyone's looking for it, about the complexities of parenting at the moment with juggling work and daycare, the complexities of daycare when a lot of kids are sick and there's this hypervigilance, like if their temperature is just a smidgen up, you got to go pick them up from daycare. Then you've got kids at home when you're trying to work and they're bouncing off the walls because they're not really very sick at all. They just like just doing their thing, and it's so heartbreaking to hear how parents are struggling because you want to be a good parent and you want to be a good team member at work. You know that the business is struggling because of all the complexities of COVID. So you want to show up well for the team and for your boss, or maybe you are the boss and you just want to show up well and you want to be the parent that your kid needs in that moment. So I think these conversations are really, really helpful. So what are some of the questions that people ask you, or possibly I should ask you, what questions do you want to be asked that people are just not seeing the need to ask? What's important for us to know?
Yeah, I guess so. So this idea of work school hours is, this is where I get really excited, is I'm really convinced that it's commercially smart. So when I was taking my research from my PhD, which was some of the challenges women were facing, this is beyond just the parenting factor, and I was presenting it to the military, which is of course mainly men, and I was trying to sell them, how do you make these changes? It was never about make these changes at the kind of downfall of men or at the downfall of the mission. It was, if you do these things to make it better for women, actually it's going to be good overall. And this is really kind of, I guess, almost my mantra on this work school hours idea. And my background is like, I'm a business consultant. I've got an MBA. I get the business side of the house, and I'm also, I guess, pragmatic. I know that organizations don't really give a crap about initiatives that'll make it better for mums, unless there's kind of a commercial outcome for it. And so this was the sort of my subsequent piece of research, was actually showing that if you look at how you change the way you construct work and do more to align it with school. I'm not saying every single role can now magically overnight be 9 to 3. Again, that's not realistic. But if you can make as many adjustments as possible to better align those things, and if you focus more on the outputs you want your staff to do as opposed to the hours, and if you focus on flexibility, that's all the stuff that's good for the people. That's my passion. I want to make the world better for the people. But there's all these commercially smart things about it. And so in terms of like, what's the question that I want to be asked is really, if organizations do this, they'll have better retention of their staff. They'll have improved staff well-being, which we know is good for performance. will have better productivity. It'll be, a massive game changer in terms of representation of women. So it's not this kind of like lovely pie in the sky academic idea that's of zero use in the real world. Like, it's actually good for business. Oh, sorry, that sounded really salesy, didn't it? But I'm so passionate about this, Kerry.
No, but that's a really good point. And I think people resist change because what is it going to cost me? Or what is it going to cost the business?
Yes.
And it's awesome to find evidence of what happens positively for the business when you look after the people.
Yeah.
Because I just want everyone to see your face right now. Like, obviously. So what are some of the case studies or stories that you can tell us that you've, been aware of or have been part of your research or your own experience?
Yeah, sure. So, oh my gosh, I've got lots of them. But so just cut me off when you need to, Kerry. I get like quite fizzing about this. But there was sort of this old adage of like from really kind of when I say archaic, I'm not referring to a person's age, more their kind of like frame of thinking. And so there's kind of archaic ideas of, I don't pay my staff here to be happy, I pay them to do their job. And it's like, you do know those two things are related? Like, it's not just this happy clappy crap. Literally, people that are happier perform better at work. There is a correlation there. And I heard this, sorry, Brene Brown's like, sorry, I'm sure I just think she's wonderful.
She's probably mentioned on like at least every second podcast, either by me or my guests. Absolutely. So bring it on.
As soon as I said it, I was like, obviously, Kerry will know this one. So anyway, Brene Brown she actually quoted someone else. I can't remember who the other person is. I just remember that she said it. And it's that there's all this neuroscience research to show that people are inherently feelings-based creatures who sometimes do some thinking, not the other way around. So if we can understand that people actually, they're feelings-based, and if you can make them feel happy, they'll do better work for you. I guess that's sort of my first thing. But then some of the stories, and it's quite interesting. I've had, I mean, of course I get pushback, right? I put this idea out there. Oh my gosh. So on the weekend, last weekend, I wrote like an article for one of New Zealand's biggest newspapers and got a lot of hate mail from it. People were like, suggesting that my idea was to, I don't know, go kill babies or something, which it wasn't, oh, you're just an academic. What the hell do you know? Really kind of sort of angry and aggressive about it. But one of the things I find interesting is that the managers that I've spoken to who are implementing some of this kind of stuff, the first step is talking to your staff. So literally, like if you're a manager and you're thinking, well, how the hell would I implement something like work school hours? I've got KPIs to meet, I've got to achieve outputs, otherwise my neck's on the line, is when they talked to their staff, and I've got countless examples, not just office workers, I've got construction managers, factory managers, people in the primary industries, so it's not just your office workers. And if they bring their staff in and say, hey, team, we're looking to find ways to create more personal time for all of you, whether that's for children or whether it's for something else, but we still need to achieve the same outputs. How do you reckon we can do that? And in every case, the manager is like quite blown away at the kind of creativity that staff come up with when they are sort of sufficiently motivated by an early knockoff. Like they're literally kind of magical productivity games, just ready to be taken.
Oh, that's cool. I thought you said games, and I'm like, oh, this sounds fun. The creativity, the games, and gains. Yeah. That's awesome. And it's important to realize, when you write an article that you put so much thought into, somebody glances at one paragraph and reacts, and they're gone. They haven't taken in the whole thing, and they're not open to anymore because they've seen one paragraph that triggered something else that has got nothing to do with you. So yeah, I was delighted to see that you'd shared that on LinkedIn, the article that you'd written, and you've written for Propel Her.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell us about that. I'm sure you got lots of feedback on that too.
Yeah, actually much nicer feedback on that one.
A supportive readership.
Yes, it's and again that because it's of course Lindsay Freeman and Shamsa Lee, which is sort of our connection. So published that with Propel Her and got really positive feedback. And it's not that everyone's like, yeah, Ellen, gosh, you're great. We're ready to sign up to this tomorrow. I haven't quite got that, but they can see the ideas. And kind of one of the biggest one that really gets me, and it was my own experience when I was working in my consulting role as well, is around this idea of swapping this idea of you get paid for the hours you work, changing that to you get paid for the outputs that you deliver. And it's such a kind of like a fundamental mindset change. But once you've made it, it's like I can't go back, right? Like I literally am like, why do you care how many hours it takes me to do something? Don't you want me to just do this piece of work and pay me for that? And so the kind of Propel Her readers could see some of those things that instead of focusing so much on did they stay at work till 5 o'clock or whenever time knockoff is, we focus more on did they get their shit done? And that should be the focus.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess, well, it takes some creativity and some time and conversation to work out what that looks like in different organizations. And, some jobs are not as tangible in their outcomes, and I was talking to some police about this just the other day. When you're preventing crime, you're preventing things like you can see some statistics, but then you don't actually know when you've made a positive difference in so many ways. So, my latest book, How to Talk to Strangers to Decrease Anxiety, Build Confidence, and Make a Bigger Difference in the World, it was really challenging for my contributing writers to share some of their stories because we think, well, I hope I made a difference there. But it's when we're on the receiving end of something positive that we can say, that really made a difference. But the ripple effect that you're creating is behind you, so you don't see it. And a lot of jobs are like that when they are, people helping roles. You don't know the impact or the significance of some act of generosity, some care, some support that you've put in place. And so, yeah, it can be really tricky to look at what is my output and what is the value of that? How do we work out those things? Have you had those kind of questions put to you?
Yeah, and I guess I've kind of got 2 points. This one's personal and one's more on the organizational. So on the organizational, one of like the examples I kind of use is that when a manager thinks, right, I need to hire a new staff member because the current activities that need to be achieved, we can't do all that with the current staff that we had. So we're going to need to hire someone new. At that point, I actually think the manager does have a really clear idea on what it is that they need that person to do. Like they're literally hiring them for a reason. It's because, right, I need task X, Y, and Z done, and I can't do it with our current staffing. And so at that point, I think it's actually really clear what is it that you want that staff member to deliver. It then just very quickly gets forgotten about and they get paid and remunerated and rewarded and promoted based on did they do those hours at their desk for that time. So that's kind of the first one. In terms of how do you measure if you're delivering an impact? And I think the police one you said is really interesting. So on the personal side, Kerry, like I don't know how to measure my impact, right? So I'm trying to create this business as a speaker and as a consultant, and I'm ambitiously trying to change the world with this work school hours thing. And I don't have a mechanism in place to measure if that's been successful, right? Because people often say, well, how or when, Ellen, will you know that this has had an impact? And I was like, shit, I haven't really figured that out yet. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I don't have a good answer for that. But what I find a little bit interesting is that, I get some negative feedback and that's a bit miserable and depressing, especially when you're doing this by yourself. It's quite lonely. But sometimes you get a nice piece of feedback from, I had a mum recently who's about to return from parental leave. And she was like, Ellen, you've made me feel more confident to now ask for the conditions that I need when I go back to work. And I was like, oh, well, I don't quite know how to measure this, but that feels like a tangible piece of impact. And maybe if I collect enough of those, I'll feel like I've done something. So yeah, that's a pretty waffly answer. I do realize that. But I'm still learning this one myself.
I think it's really important to have that email folder or the folder on your phone, of the text messages that you get, of the positive feedback that you get, because you don't know. And I walked out of an event recently that I spoke at, and I knew the things that I could have said or that I could have pieced together more effectively. So I've got my professional speaking hat on, and I've got a bit of a crowd of some of my global professional speaker mentors in my head going, you missed this opportunity, you didn't do this. And so to share with my husband, there was a lot of beautiful Indian women holding my hand and thanking me and not letting go of my hand and then hugging me and then coming back for another hug. And then, text messages that just have little words like, people like you with a beautiful heart. And you go, okay, you know what? They didn't know about the conversation in my head of all the things that I could have done differently.
Mm-hmm.
They just appreciated that I showed up honestly and encouragingly for them. And so we do need to remind ourselves, and I think remind each other. So, sometimes I remember when I was a new coach, so this is back probably 2005, I was on my way to meet a client who I felt a little daunted by. He's so much more professional than me. This is the conversation in my head.
Yeah.
Maybe the same age, but, he probably seemed a little bit older, more professional, more educated, more eloquent, all of these things. And I called one of my colleagues and I said, can you just remind me that I'm a good coach? And she's like, and I was just like hoping for the, good as in ordinary. But she was like, oh, Kerry, you're this. And she gave me really specific feedback and things that she'd noticed about the way that I would show up absolutely present and supportive of the client, and just specific things that I can't remember now. But what I remember was that I was so glad I made that phone call, because she just helped me get my head right and go, it's actually not about me. I'm just going to show up for him. It's about him. And he hired me to work with him for the next 3 to 6 months. So it was, just important to shift my thinking. And sometimes we need our friends and colleagues to help us to do that if we forget to look in our own little file of text messages.
Yes. And we're sometimes, and again, like sometimes I don't always take my own medicine, right?
Yes.
So I think we're all guilty of it. I hope I'm not the only person that does that. But, I'm such a terrible, I think we all are, like, terrible critics to ourselves. So, I might get 27 compliments and one piece of negative feedback. What do you think I spend my time and energy thinking about? It's one thing, which I know is stupid.
Yeah.
And in fact, again, to quote Brene Brown, gosh, I love her. She talked about the fact that once that you get a lot of negative feedback, especially when you've been a bit brave and putting your thoughts out to the world. You get a barrage of negative feedback, and it's quite crushing. But she just talked about putting more intention around whose feedback she was going to listen to and who she wasn't.
Yes.
So easier to say than do, but that's what I'm trying really hard to do. Is this? Yeah, there's some. Again, there were actually a lot of positive comments after this newspaper article, but of course, I just forget those and focus on the negative ones. But they were. I'm just trying to not be snobby, but think, you know what, that person clearly hasn't read everything I've said, like you mentioned before, Kerry. And, they clearly haven't got the full picture here. And, I don't actually need to take on board that particular person's feedback who writes something nasty about me behind a keyboard. So if someone wants to give me some criticism and they do it in a kind way, in a kind of intelligent, reasonable, logical way, then I'll take that one on board. But perhaps that kind of nasty comment with not a lot of thought behind it, I can try to ignore.
Yeah, I think it can be helpful to realize that they're speaking from their place of pain or frustration, and it really has got nothing to do with you. I just want to go back, because when you were saying that, you get all this positive feedback and one negative piece and you focus on that and it's stupid. And I went, yeah. And I'm like, I just want to go, no, I'm not saying, yeah, it's stupid. Which is what I said. I could have got Lyndon to cut it out. But what I was agreeing with you there was like, yeah, we tend, it's normal. It's so normal that we focus on the negative thing, because that's how our brain is wired. So it's wired to look after us, to protect us. And so we see a danger and we're like, oh my gosh, that's a danger. And so it's very easy to let go of those things that are safe and nice and supportive, because we don't need to do anything about it. But we actually do need to do something about it. We need to take it on board as learning. And when I realized this, that feedback, like positive feedback, is not just a nice feeling, but you can learn from that. You can hear what someone has said and go, interesting. Okay, so I wanted to be supportive, encouraging, insightful, whatever. And when they've said, that was really insightful, thank you for sharing that, if they give their thanks specifically, then you're learning what's working. So it's very valuable, but our brain doesn't go, take notice of that, that's valuable. We need to consciously do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. That was a valuable insight for me. I was in front of a room of coaches leading a coach training. I was actually the assistant trainer, but the lead trainer was called out with one of the participants struggling with something. And so I ended up running the rest of the afternoon. And so at the end of the day, we always go around the tables and, people just share an insight or something that helps them to feel complete on the day. Like they've said their one little piece to the room about like something they learned, or they might acknowledge someone else in the room for helping them learn something. And one of the coaches in the room, she was a lead trainer herself, but in that course she was a participant. And later at the bar, she said to me, I was watching how people were acknowledging you at the end of the session. And she said, it's very interesting because there's two main ways that people take on feedback, like positive feedback, like, oh, you're amazing. Thank you so much for this. People can be like in the arrogant space of like, oh yeah, yep, got it. Yep, I'm good. And I'm like, nowhere, I'm nowhere near that. I'm just like, really? But she said the other thing is that you can dismiss it, kind of flick it off, like, oh, no, I didn't really. And she said, but you were curious and you were learning from what they were saying. And I went, yeah, I guess I was. And then I felt kind of exposed. It was kind of like she's standing backstage watching me, while everyone else is just having a conversation. But it was such a valuable insight because I realized, yes, there is rich learning in hearing what you're doing well, because we don't see it. We see what we didn't do well. So I hope that's useful.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And to those listening too, because I know that, we all really struggle with that inner critic, or, in our mental fitness coaching, we call it the judge. We have this inner judge just going, should have done it like this. We know we've all got our own inner judge. And it is different for everybody, but we relate to that. Yeah. Yeah. So tell me what you're looking forward to now. Here it is, nearly August. What's the rest of the year look like for you?
So I'm actually pretty excited. So on the business side, which again is, God, it's scary. Tell you what else is scary is, so I'm not just selling a product or a service. I'm selling me.
Yeah.
And to be totally honest, like, I'm not someone who shies away from the spotlight. I love being on stage, and I don't mind being the center of attention. So, if anyone heard me say that was not the case, I'd be like, Ellen, bullshit. We know you love being on stage. But it's a whole different thing. So it's quite nice when someone else puts the spotlight on you, but to try and be selling yourself is really terrifying, because then when people like reject your services, it feels like a personal rejection because it's me that I'm trying to sell.
Yeah.
But on that side, I'm actually starting to get a bit of uptake, which was really exciting. And I'm speaking at a couple of Australian conferences in September. This is virtually, which is really exciting. And a couple in New Zealand. And I'm starting to get kind of booked more to do leadership training and to speak about some of these ideas I have around how we can make the working world better. And so, yeah, I'm actually pretty excited. I've got, quite a few bookings between now and the end of the year, and hoping that kind of continues, that I just, keep doing more of this work, and hopefully some people will like
it. But I love your excitement. And I do want to know, if you come to Australia, when you say you're speaking at Australian conferences, I'm like, woohoo, let's do coffee. But yeah, there are a lot of virtual conferences on right now. Oh, which brings to mind Anna Maria Lang, who I also connected with because of Shamsa's International Women's Day post about me. Thanks, Shamsa. She has you speaking at her conference that she's doing.
Yes. Yeah, that's one of the ones in Australia. So I'm very excited. I connected with Anna Maria. Oh, it was earlier this year, again via LinkedIn. LinkedIn's great, by the way. It's
yes.
Yeah. So I'm very excited. She's doing some amazing stuff. So yeah, I'm very excited to be speaking at her conference as well.
Yeah, and quite a number of women veterans who are speaking. And and she did ask me, but I was just not ready to say yes to a virtual conference. I've just been having, that's another whole story, but I've been having, I snuck into my profiles online and took off the words international speaker. Since I'm telling you now, I just might as well tell everybody. So I've been, I shared on the podcast, this is my year of meaningful conversations, even though I've been doing that for the last 20 years, but probably sharing more in one-on-one conversations, and writing a lot more, and working through some of my stories. And at the beginning of the year, when I saw my Asia professional speakers community, sort of ramping up, getting bookings, speaking around the world, a bit more travel, I felt this like, oh yes, we can get back into it. But I also felt like that's not for me right now. I need to take this step back and just focus on the one-on-one coaching conversations. And I've been doing some incredible walk and talk sessions with some leaders, just like along the coastline or around the zoo. We have an amazing zoo here in Dubbo. Doing one-on-one leadership retreats, which is giving people a really safe space to think through challenges and aspirations. Because you know that sometimes those goals are like really scary. They're vulnerable when they're new. Who do you share your big ideas with? But you've got to be safe for that too. So it's helping people to unpack their stories and their possibilities more, but also unpacking my own story and elements of my own story that I haven't really unpacked in a way that I can share that is useful for other people to heal. We live in a very different time now. So Danny Sullivan mentioned in his podcast conversation, the speak up culture that we didn't have back then. And I was thinking, and there's so many places where we still don't have that. We don't speak up, or we don't feel safe to speak up. And I think the more that people do, and it's like the work that you're doing too, it's really important because it gives people an opportunity to say, this isn't working for me, or what I would like to do, like the way that I can contribute best is like this. So it helps people to tap into their own personal story more. So I just knew I needed to do the personal work and share elements of my story that might be, personal and challenging to share, but valuable. It's valuable for me to share because then I'm letting go of, the shame of not being able to articulate, things that I've been challenged by, things that I've gone through. But it helps other people also to see things for what they are, to see a toxic work culture for what it is and say, I don't have to stay in this working relationship, or I don't have to put up with this kind of abuse. But we didn't have language for those things 20 years ago. Yeah. So, as we move forward, we grow together as we share our stories and as we, share the journey and grapple with those awkward questions. So anyway, this wasn't going to become about me, but I could see you nodding. And
I was going to, if you're interested to share something. So when I did this PhD journey, right? So when I was in the army, I loved it. Honestly, Kerry, I really did. And I was one of those, almost a bit of a dick sometimes. Like I was so determined to prove that as a woman, I'm just as tough as the rest of the guys. And I was genuinely quite proud of that. Like I was, I was physically pretty robust. I would always carry the same weight as the guys. I'd always do the same number of press ups and almost in like a bit of a meathead kind of a way about it. Like I just really wanted to prove that I was tough. And when anyone outside of the military would ask me like, oh, what's it like being a woman in the military? It would kind of irritate me because I was like, well, it's just the same. Like, don't think it's any different. And when I did my PhD journey, and as I said, I started it literally, I wanted the qualification. It wasn't because I was trying to solve some challenge for women in the military, because I didn't even allow myself to acknowledge that there was one. Then when I started interviewing these women who, had done the same role as me, so we all had very similar backgrounds, and I asked them really open questions, Kerry. So I wasn't trying to find like the dirt or find the crappy stuff. I was just like, tell me about your leadership experiences. Tell me about your challenging experiences. Tell me about your positive experiences. And it was just really open. And then I gathered all this data, and it forced me, because a lot of the women opened up, right? And so they shared some pretty dark things. And what I found really interesting and confronting, but in a healthy way, is it made me realize that not everything for me had been as rosy as I had thought it was. And it doesn't destroy my military memories. It doesn't. Like I hold that really dear. I had an amazing experience. But I was like, oh, yeah, that's right. That happened to me too. And actually, yeah, I did experience sexual harm. And why did I think that was okay? And it was when women shared their stories, when you kind of then see it, you can't unsee it. So what I just thought was like, well, that's just part of being in the military. Like you're just going to have that stuff happen, and didn't even acknowledge that it was a thing. I now, like through having these, I mean, they were interviews, but kind of conversations, I suppose, with other women, it made me then realize some of my own experiences and that, yeah, why did I think that that was okay to be touched like that? Or why did I think it was okay to have that said to me? And now, interesting, circling back to what you said to me at the start. So, work school hours is this thing that I'm trying to address. And you're right, I've only literally just yesterday started being a working, like a school age parent. But some of these other things from the military, I am like, I experienced that and I don't want the future woman to. And that's, yeah, that is a big part of my driver is that I want to make the rest of my own working life as good as it can be. But I also want to make sure that anyone who comes after me, as much of the negative stuff as possible can be taken away so they don't need to experience it.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know if that's
Amazing, amazing. Thank you. Because as soon as you started sharing, I realized that my vulnerability in sharing led you to that. And I made the choice to go there, even though I was like, oh, I've got some safe questions that we can just like, finish the podcast, nice and light. But I think this really matters that we share this because you've just deepened my insight, and I'm sure others who are listening. And I realized that we relate to Brene Brown in this instance, where she talked about her research led her to that breakdown where she realized, oh, I'm not living a wholehearted life, when she was interviewing people about, interviewing the wholehearted. And so um, our work cleanses us and heals us and restores us in ways that we didn't know that we needed restoring.
yeah.
So yeah, yay to all of those listening and us for doing the personal work, because I think it is of service to ourselves and others. And we can't just be of service to the world if we're not allowing the work to support us also. Does that make sense?
Oh, it totally does. And my views have changed on this so much. Like I'm now so all these like feelings based things that from the military point of view, I used to try really hard to separate myself from that because I thought, well, that's professional, that you keep your feelings separate at work and you don't go too deep. You just, you do your task. Whereas now, the more I like almost self indulge into my own feelings, I feel like it unleashes more power. So, like one
Yeah.
example, and by the way, you're so right. When you opened up to me, it made me want to open up more. But a recent task that I've been involved in, this is as a volunteer, myself and a few others, we've been helping getting people out of Afghanistan. So these
Yeah.
are people that have worked with the New Zealand Defence Force, and because of that, they're at risk from the Taliban. Without going into all the details, it's been a horrifically challenging task. Like I've never been challenged more in my life with something so difficult. And one of the things that I found is that it's been an emotionally challenging task, right? Like feeling responsible for the lives of these people was just horrible. But with my team, I was able to like let that emotion out. And had I not been able to, and had I felt like, well, if I do that, that's unprofessional and they won't respect me anymore, there is no way that I also would have brought like my A game. And so I
Mm.
actually, in fact, I think Propeller who might be publishing it today, actually. I wrote a bit of an article about lessons learned from the Afghanistan evacuation. And one of them is about when you can be really vulnerable with your team, which includes sharing the stuff that you don't necessarily love about yourself or some of the tricky bits, that unlocks your ability to bring the best of yourself. And I was sort of sharing this reflection with the team, and I was saying to the guys, I was like, had I not been able to cry in front of you all and vent and swear and say all these things that was causing me to feel ashamed and vulnerable and all that, there's no way that I would have also been able to do all these things, which actually were pretty great. And we wouldn't have had success if I hadn't been able to do that. So it's
Mm.
this, yeah, the more I get into it, the more I'm like, the more you can open up and be vulnerable, the better you can become. Oh, does
Yes.
that even make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I think the reason that you said, does it make any sense? And I said, does it make sense when I shared, is because we just feel like maybe I've just shared too much, or, but to those listening, it's like, Ah, thank you. Breath of fresh air, and it's sparking other insights. So, my friends, if you're listening and getting insights for yourself, please write them down. Just pull over or make a note in your phone if you're out jogging. I know you're listening in so many different places, and yeah, it's so important that we capture our own insights and be honest with ourselves, because we can't really show up in the world honest with others if we're not honest with ourselves. And when you were sharing, Ellen, about your experiences as a veteran, I'm thinking, like, my dad was a veteran, my son's a veteran, my grandparents, both my mum's dad served in World War II,
Yes.
Papua New Guinea and Borneo, and my dad's mum served in the Air Force in Townsville. And they all, like, all four of my grandparents lived to their late 90s. And so we had so many rich conversations with them. I think they tend to have more conversations with their grandkids and great grandkids. So my son was really blessed with conversations. Sometimes I would ask them questions to just, well, my grandma, to distract her from pain. And so I would say, ask her about Townsville. And, she just shared some incredible insights. And I realized that I think it's the English heritage, and it's the veteran legacy, I guess, the stoicism. I've said I come from a long line of Stoics, and so we dismiss pain and trauma that we've gone through because maybe we can minimize it by knowing that somebody else's trauma is worse, and so we just go, oh, I haven't been through anything like they have. And yeah, but it is useful for us to integrate all of those stories into our life rather than just park them in a box somewhere in the past. But it takes time, I think, and a lot of safe conversations to work through. How do we do that? And how do I see things, and how do I minimize trauma? Because I don't notice until somebody else says, woo, that was like really a challenging thing. And that happened on my podcast recently, and I'm like, am I going to share this? But I'm hitting publish today on that one.
Good.
So yeah, so thank you. I really appreciate your sharing, and yeah, just sharing the journey. Literally, even though we've just met, I know that. Well, I've just loved your excitement, but also your honesty, and just showing up with your experiences and your insights around that. And I know that, when we finish this call, we'll probably both go away and go, oh, I could have shared this and I could have shared that, but that's okay.
I was already thinking that.
Maybe make a note of it and share it in a post when we launch the podcast. Or feel free to just give me a buzz later this afternoon and just go, oh my gosh, listen to this. So before I just ask you a couple of fun questions to wrap up, what are you sitting with right now? What is it that you want to share?
I guess, well, obviously I want to share that I think this idea of work school hours is the way of the future with work. I think that, this kind of archaic idea of we work for a set amount of hours, which fundamentally do not align with the hours of children being at school, just feels so freaking bonkers to me. So that's I'm kind of sitting with that. And I think the other thing, which is, I don't know, this doesn't all tie in together perfectly yet, but I just am starting to think just how much feelings, the heart, has to do with so much of what we do, what drives us when we're performing well, when we're performing poorly. And the more we can get in touch with our feelings, gosh, I sound so sloppy. I never would have said this in the military, but I really believe it. The more we can get into our feelings, I think the better thinking we can do to add more value. So that's my closing thought feeling.
Absolutely. I love it. And while you say you wouldn't have said this in the military, but I think you could now. I just was sitting with a senior male in the army who really shared thoughts and feelings, and a lot of feelings, and just a beautiful, authentic conversation. And I found that so refreshing, because I want to, step into the stoic cognitive space. So the coach training that I did. So realizing that my coach training and connecting with the neuroscientists, through the development of the Neuro Leadership Institute, I was part of that journey, and I loved hearing the neuroscientists, from Harvard, UCLA. They're talking about the neuroscience of decision making and insight. And so we did talk about, the amygdala, the emotional responses, but it was still a very cognitive conversation. It's like, this is the brain activity, this is how we can set ourselves or others up for insight. And so I'm in this insight space, not, the work of Brené Brown has really matched up with that, but from the feeling space. And so her latest book, The Atlas of the Heart, that is going to be featured in an upcoming podcast with one of my colleagues who is working through her book, 2 emotions a week. So it's going to take him a whole year. But he's really doing a deep dive on 2 of the emotions and experiences that are in her book, Atlas of the Heart, and working through that each week for the next year. And I just went, let's do a podcast about that. That's amazing. It'd be amazing to hear his insights. Okay, so thank you for all you've shared. And when you just reflected again on work school hours, I just thought, have I given you enough airtime for that? We've talked about a lot of things. But we'll put some links in the podcast so people can go find more.
This has been, I kind of love it, Kerry. It's reflective of your book title, How to Have Conversations with Strangers. Like, I love this. There was no real agenda. We've never met until today, and we've gone deep. Like, go you. You've really facilitated that. So it's been enjoyable.
Oh, thank you. So just a couple of quick questions to wrap up. So I'd love to hear about a story of the kindness of strangers in your world, whether you had the opportunity to do something or somebody surprised you with an act of kindness. So I'll give you a moment for that.
I think I've done some acts of kindness in the world, and I think sort of the Afghan evacuation hopefully would be considered that. But on the receiving end, it's often, and it comes back, you said something at the start about the power of belief, and I've got a friend who was part of my Afghan team, and he talks a lot about the power of belief, and I really believe in that and how much of a positive impact it can have. So, when we're talking about the fact that, sometimes you have days where you've got your inner critic happening, sometimes you even get external people criticizing you. And so when someone just gives you a piece of nice feedback, like, that is a real act of kindness. Sometimes I don't know if it's realized just what an impact that can have on a person's day. Just being told, hey, you did something great and I appreciated it. I'll be like, wow, that's really filled my cup up. Thank you. So I'd say that's an experience of receiving an act of kindness.
Yes, I love that, because that's something that I really wanted to convey through the book, that it matters that you share your gratitude. It matters that you acknowledge people, that you notice people, that you notice the efforts they make. So that's beautiful. Thank you. It's not just the big things, and it's not just the expensive things like filling up someone's car full of petrol, which is very expensive at the moment, or paying for someone's groceries because they suddenly realize that their card's not working for their $100. So thank you. And favorite book? What's a favorite book?
I love To Kill a Mockingbird. That's one of my favorites from childhood. So that's probably up there.
Wow. Well, I never read that until Ethan was doing it at school, and then we went through it. So that's cool. Thank you. And what have you enjoyed lately?
Enjoying having meaningful connections with people. I love, like this, Kerry, and I've had, others with other people in the last few months. I love having meaningful connections, meaningful conversations with people. That's more than just, I say the weather. I know we did actually talk about the weather at the start, but I love, going deep. So that's something I've really enjoyed.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I have really enjoyed this conversation with you, and I know that our listeners will too. And we will share your links in the show notes. And I hope that people will send you a message and say, thank you. I heard you on Connect with Confidence podcast. You connected really well. And you are making a beautiful difference in the world.
Okay. Kerry, thank you very, very much. I've genuinely, I've loved this. And thanks for having me on your podcast. It's lovely.
Thank you, Ellen, for just jumping into this conversation with a stranger that you met on the internet. Really appreciate it. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks.